Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos B'tzias HaPas. We hopefully will be completing today Daf Samach Zayin Amid Beis. We're not covering a lot of ground very quickly because this is a very complex sugya. This sugya here of Pas Bekisnin. Why did I just spill my tea all over? Let's see. My notebook. Let's see. Bear with me 1 second here while I take care of the damage. Okay. All right. Not too bad. Not on this farm, apparently. Okay. So we're learning this complex sugya of Pas Bekisnin. Today's learning should be a schus refuah shalema for Moreno Rav Shalom Ruvain ben Shima, for Ariel Yosef ben Miriam Razel, and Meir ben Chayesara, all of whom need a refuah shalema. And of course, our learning should also be a schus for Achenu Kabeis Yisrael, Nisuna Batzaru Bashivya, Haim Nebein Bayama Bein Bayabasha, Amaki Mirachem Aleihem, V'Yitzia Mitzar L'Revacha Me'afelo La'Oiro Mishibed L'Geula, Hashta Bagala V'Zman Karivin Amaramein. So, we pick up today in Siman Kuf Samach in the midst of Siv Zayin. We're on Samach Zayin Amid Beis, and we really are up to Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Lamed Dalid, which covers the last two words of the Ramah on the top line of Samach Zayin Amid Beis. But it's necessary for us to give a little bit of a brief recap of where we were holding for the sake of continuity. So, we've been discussing Pas Bekisnin, and specifically, the Mechaber has been defining for us what kind of foods are considered Pas Bekisnin. So far, we've seen three kind of definitions. The first definition that the Mechaber gave us was, he said, Pas Bekisnin is a bread dough that was formed like a kiss, like a pocket. So we took what essentially is a normal bread dough. It's a dough made out of flour and water, and we made a pocket out of it, and filled that pocket with other types of food. So a classic example would be the potato knish, or the potato baraka, or the schnitzel and pastrami baraka, or the pulled beef brisket baraka. Or it could be filled with fruit. Maybe it's filled with a pie filling. Maybe it's filled with apples, so it's an apple turnover. That might be a little bit different, actually. An apple turnover, usually in my experience, the dough is a flavored dough as well. So let's cast that to the side for a moment. We're talking here about even an unflavored dough. So we have an unflavored dough, we made a pocket out of it, and we made a filling. That is Pas Bekisnin. It's really over there. There's kind of like an Iker Tuffle mechanism at work over here. We don't eat it for the dough. We really eat it for the filling. Also, the taste of the filling completely overwhelms the dough. We're not kaveh suda on this. It's a form factor also that we're not kaveh suda on. So therefore, this is Pas Bekisnin. The bracha becomes downgraded from hamaitzi to a mezainas, and the bracha achrona gets downgraded from birkas hamazon to bracha achas me'en shalish. A second definition that the Mechaber brought down was the Shitas HaRambam. He brought down the Shitas HaRambam, where Pas Bekisnin is where the dough is not a regular bread dough. It's a flavored dough. Maybe it's a sweetened dough. It's a dough where when you kneaded the dough, you kneaded it with honey, you kneaded it with oil, you kneaded it with mei peiros, maybe you kneaded it with eggs, maybe you kneaded it with spices. Maybe you made a savory dough. But this dough is no longer a regular bread dough. It's now a flavored dough. And because it's a flavored dough with a different taste, and like we saw in the Mishnah Berurah, the Mishnah Berurah said that in this case, the taste of these spices and flavorings are definitely nicker in the isa. It's nicker in the dough, and therefore the Rambam says this is Pas Bekisnin, and since it's Pas Bekisnin, again, the bracha is downgraded from hamaitzi down to mezainos, and the bracha achrona is downgraded into a bracha achas me'ein shalosh. Then the Ramah came along. The Ramah said, he brought this down in the name of Yesh Omrim, and the Ramah turned around. He's basing this on Rashi. He's basing this on the Aruch, and he's taking issue with the idea, really, that the Rambam is talking about a flavored dough, where the dough is kind of, even though it's nicker, it's only ma'at. It's only, you needed it with these other flavorings, but you didn't use a lot of it. You just used enough that the flavor is nicker. You do taste the tam of the additives. The Ramah said there are those that want to say that in that case, that would be called pas gomor. In the words of the Mishnah Berurah over here, the Mishnah Berurah says, "Hainu eicha de'iriv ba'alisha rak ma'at dvash v'cholav." If when you needed the dough, you just used a small amount of honey or a small amount of milk, just enough that the tam is nirgash, you could discern the taste of the flavorings in the dough. There are those that say that that's not enough to change the designation of this food from pas gomor to pas ababakistin. What's pas ababakistin, said the Ramah? Pas ababakistin is when you use harbe tavlin. If you use a lot of spices, oidvash, or a lot of honey, kemine mesika shekar lekach, if you go ahead and you turn this dough essentially into cake, you use a lot of flavorings, you use a lot of sweeteners, and in the words of the Mishnah Berurah, it's that the al yedei zeh yeminkar tavlin batam yoiser me'akemach, where the taste of the additives, the flavor of the additives is more prominent. It overwhelms and overshadows the taste of the kemach, the taste of the flour, and the taste of the dough. Or, like the Mishnah Berurah says, if you're using honey, oil, if you're using milk, if you're using mei peiros, be'inan shia haroiv mehen, umiot mayim, if when you needed the dough, you used a majority of other agents other than water. So in these cases, the Mishnah Berurah says that the taste of the additives overwhelms the taste of the dough itself, the taste of the plain dough, the taste of the plain kemach. That, says the Ramah, is really the Shitas HaRambam, who says that dough that's needed with additives and flavorings becomes pas haba bekistin. Then the Ramah ended off here on the top line of Samach Zayin Amud Beis, and he said, "V'chein noihagim," and that's the way we're noyig. What does that mean, that that's the way we're noyig? So if you take a look at Mishnah Berurah's Katan Lamed Daled, the Mishnah Berurah says, "V'chein noyagin." What does it mean that we're noyig that way? With this explanation of pas haba bekistin given by the Ramah, says the Mishnah Berurah, "She'oifin lelechem mishnah pas im ma'at shemen v'tavlin," because we know that the halacha is that for Shabbos, when we're required to have lechem mishnah, and certainly the lechem mishnah must be hamoitzi, we know that we will bake challah for lechem mishnah that has a small amount of oil, a small amount of eggs maybe, a small amount of flavorings, and yet we consider it lechem mishnah and we consider it hamoitzi. So says the Ramah, you see that we're noyig like this Rashi and this Aruch and this explanation of the Rambam, that when the Rambam says that pas haba bekistin is a flavored dough, he doesn't mean a dough with a small amount of flavorings. He means a dough with a lot of flavoring. A dough with a lot of flavoring is what becomes pas haba bekistin. But a dough with a little flavoring, that is pas gomor, and since it's pas gomor, berchasa is berchas hamoitzi, and since the bracha is hamoitzi, we're able to use it for lechem mishnah. Now let's continue over here in the Mechaber, second line down, Samach Zayin Amud Beis, where the Mechaber is now going to bring down another pshat, another explanation in pas haba bekisnin, and this is brought down by the Aruch in the name of Rav Hai Goyen. Says the Mechaber, V'yesh befarshim, there are those that explain what's pas haba bekisnin, shehi pas, it is a regular bread dough, bein mitubeles, whether it's flavored and spiced, bein she'eina mitubeles, or even if it's not, even if it's a dough made out of just water and flour. So what makes it possible bekisnim? Says the Mechaber, she'oisim oisam ke'ovim yeveshim. We make them thick. Av means thick. Ke'ovim, I'm thinking that this means it's a very thick, very heavy dough. Yeveshim, it's dry. And the final baked product is a very dry, crumbly product. Vikaisesin oisam. And this is something that is hard and brittle, and you need to chew it up. It's a pretzel, or it's crackers, or it's breadsticks, or it's kichlach. This is something which is made out of a thick, heavy, dry dough, and the end product is a hard, brittle product. Vikaisesin oisam. And you chew it up. The Heimanikram bishkainish. This is what's called, says the Mechaber, bishkainish, which I have seen translated as biscuits. Okay, so this over here is now another pshat in Pasa Babakistan. What's Pasa Babakistan according to this? Pasa Babakistan is where you took something which really could be absolutely a bread dough. You made a dough even out of plain flour and plain water. You didn't necessarily add flavorings. You didn't necessarily add fruit juices. It could be a bona fide bread dough of water and flour. What's different about it that makes it Pasa Babakisnin? Its form factor. The form factor is that it's a hard, dry, brittle, crunchy, if you will, food. So like I said, imagine a hard pretzel. Imagine a hard breadstick. Imagine hard kichlach. Imagine hard crackers. So it's not by virtue of the taste of the dough that it is now changed to Pasa Babakistan and it becomes a mezainis and a bracha achas bein shalish. It's the form factor. It's that it's a hard, crunchy, baked item that you need to chew up. That's not bread. That's not something that you kaveh sud on. That's not pas. No one's going to look at a breadstick. Yes, we call it a breadstick, but it's a breadstick. It's not bread. You're not going to make a sandwich out of it. It's not. It's just a different form factor. And because of that, it's mezainas and bracha achas me'en shalosh. And according to this, the etymology of Pasa Babakisnin would be because it's ka'avim yeveshim v'koisesin oisam. You chew it up. That's Pasa Babakisnin. I guess it's kind of like, why do we call crackers crackers? Because you chew them up and they go crack, crack, crack. So they're called crackers. This is Pasa Babakisnin. It's cracker bread. And therefore, it's not something that you're kaveh sud on. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Lamed Hey, Ka'ovim Yeveshim. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Kach Shema Ba'arvi. This Ka'ovim Yeveshim, that's what it is called in the Lashon of Arvi. Obelshain Svarad Nikra Bushkigush. The Nasis Vechameshes Mine Dagon. This is made out of grain. Uvemayim Levad. And usually it's made out of only flour and water. So why is it Pasa Babakistan? However, Ba'afiyosam Nasim Yeveshim Kol Kach. It becomes dried out so much when you bake it. Ad Shenifrachim. Until it's crumbly. It's brittle. Ve'en zen nikra oichel. We don't call it a food like pas, which is something that's eaten to fill you up, to be kaveh sudan, ela koises. It's something that's meant to be chewed. Ve'en darkam lechem mizeh harbe. It's not the derech to eat a lot of it, and you're not kaveh suda on it. Lechein ein lo din pas, and therefore it doesn't get the din of pas. It doesn't get hamoitzi and berkas hamazon. I took a look in Aruch HaShulchan, and Aruch HaShulchan expands upon this a little bit. And Aruch HaShulchan says like this. He says, Lepirish shel Rav Haigoyin, which is this shita, heavy Pasa Babakistan. What's Pasa Babakistan? It's something which is niloish b'mayim belvad. It's a dough that's kneaded just with water. It's flour and water. Ubeloi tavlin, without any other spices. So what makes it different? What makes it Pasa Babakistan? Ella she'arichasoi einoi kistam lechem. The aricha, which means the formation, the forming of the dough is not done like regular bread. In what way is it like regular bread? Shehu yavesh ma'oid. It's very dry. Ubetam zeh bilvad ein lo brachas hamaitzi. And for that reason alone, it doesn't get a bracha of hamaitzi. Vatam, what's the reason for that? K'mayche kasav a lavush b'sivav. The Aruch HaShulchan brings down a lavush. V'zel l'shaynai, this is the lashon of the lavush. D'loi kavu chachamim hamaitzi v'gimel bracha yisafilu b'kazayis. Because the Chazal did not establish a bracha rishayna of hamaitzi and a bracha achrayna of berkas hamazon, even if you eat a kazayis, ela belechem, only on plain bread, shederech roiv b'nei adam l'kfaya alav sudasai. The type of lechem that most people would be kaveh sudan. Tahainu isa shenilusha b'mayim levad. This is a dough that's made with just water and flour. V'akemach umayim ikr. The water and the flour are the ikr. V'nefes kedarka. And it's baked in the normal fashion. B'loi shinui. Shahu achashu b'fi kol. V'kaveh brachal atzma machmas chashivusai. That is the bread that's called a davar chashuv, that has the chashivas of lechem, that gets a bracha of hamaitzi lechem and aretz and birkas hamazon. Aval kol shenasa b'shinoi, but when you make it in a mishunadik way, you make it hard and brittle. She'ein derech roi b'nei adam lasis kamoisa v'lekvaya alav, lo chayvu levarech hamaitzi v'gimel brachais, elim ken acha mehen shir shederech b'nei adam lekvaya alav, unless you eat the shear that turns it into a kviyus, which then you need hamaitzi and birkas hamazon, even on pas haba bekisnין. Okay, so now we've seen another explanation here of pas haba bekisnין. Finally, the Mechaber closes out Siv Zayin, 3 lines down in the middle of the line, and he says, "V'halacha k'divrei kulam." We're makel on all of these 4 different explanations of pas haba bekisnין. We consider all of them to be pas haba bekisnין, and the bracha on all of them is a mezainos, and the bracha achrayna is a bracha achas me'in shalosh, unless we eat a shear that we are kaveh suda on them, and if we're kaveh suda on them, then you have to make hamaitzi and birkas hamazon. So v'halacha k'divrei kulam shalachol elu advarim noisted lehem dinim sha'amarnu b'pas haba bekisnין. In all of these cases, we would apply the halachas of pas haba bekisnין. Okay, now we go to Sif Ches, which really continues on the topic of pas haba bekisnין. Lachmaniyos, which most people translate as cakes, but I don't like that translation. I don't have a better one, except for just sticking with the word lachmaniyos, and now the Mechaber is going to explain what lachmaniyos are. And we're going to see the Mechaber says there are 2 different types of lachmaniyos. Lachmaniyos, so it depends. Oisan shebli lasan ava. Lachmaniyos that are made with a thick, heavy batter, aka a dough. There are lachmaniyos that are formed out of a dough. Shekoirin uvliash, which the Mechaber says are called uvliash, which the Aruch HaShulchan says we don't know what uvliash are. Lechem gomerhu, that is lechem gomer, that is full-fledged bread. Umevarach alav hamaitzi, and the bracha is hamaitzi, uberkas hamazon, and the bracha achrayna is benching. You need to bench. Okay, let's take a look at Mishnah Berurah's Kat Lamed Vav. Says the Mishnah Berurah that these lachmaniyos that are blila ava, the lachmaniyos that are formed out of a dough, lechem gomerhu, says the Mishnah Berurah, denasim rak mikemach umayim, they're made out of only flour and water, kisharpas, like all the bread. Va'av shehim dakim, even though they're thin, so it's not a loaf of bread, it's something thin. But they're not the hard, dry, brittle things that we discussed in Siv Zayin. Dehem yeveshim ma'oid, because those are very dry. Ve'enam asuyim la'achila, they're not made to eat with a meal. V'rak kaisis in oisam, we just chew them up as a snack. Likinuach, as a snack. Aval elu asuyim la'achila, these are made mamish for achila. Okay, sounds to me like this lachmaniyos with a blila ava, you know what it is? It's a lafa. A lafa, or a soft flatbread. So what is that? It's made out of a dough. It's a dough. It's not a liquid batter. It's made out of a dough, and it's flat and thin, but it's soft. You take a loaf and you roll it up, right? You take a soft flatbread, you roll it up. So this is something, the dough is a bread dough. It's made out of flour and water. It has the consistency of bread. It's something that's soft. You use it to be kaveh suda, right? You take a lafa, you fill it up with shawarma, you roll it up, you have a beautiful sandwich. You kaveh suda on it. So lachmaniyos that are blila ava, says the mechaber, that's mamish pas, that's lechem gomer. Umavarch alav ha'maitzi uberchas hamazon. And like the Mishnah Berurah says over here, what would be your argument that it should not be hamaitzi and berchas hamazon? That it's thin? So what is thin? In Sif Zayin, when we spoke over here about hard, brittle things, over there we were speaking about thin breads, but those thin breads are hard and brittle. And we said that it's the form factor that makes it not bread. So over there in Sif Zayin, you're making a mezainis. But over here in Sif Ches, we're talking about something that's nice and soft. This is bread. So it's lechem gomer. So that's the first type of lachmaniyos. Then continues the mechaber 2 lines off the bottom and middle of the line. But va'oisan sheblilasan raka. But the lachmaniyos that have a liquid batter, a soft batter, something that you could pour. Va'oisan sheblilasan raka v'dakim ma'oid. They're very thin. Shekorin nivlash. Mevarech aleihem borei mina mizainos. Ubracha achas me'en shalish. Those are mizainos and bracha achas me'en shalish. Now, what are these nivlash? Well, let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. It says the Mishnah Berurah is cut lamed zayin. The Kosva Achrayim, the Achrayim writes, and he brings this down from the Bach, the Shla, the Magen Avram, and others. The Kosva Achrayim, Dahainu Masha Kairin Beloshin Russia Nol Silka. In Russian, he says we call this Nol Silka. I spoke to a Russian tonight. I asked him if he ever heard of something called Nol Silka, and he did not. So this didn't help me. So, okay, the Chavetz Chaim says in Russian it was called Nol Silka. Shema arvin kemach im harbe mayim. You mix up flour in a lot of water. Bakdera, in a pot. Kemoi daisa, like a cereal or a porridge. V'shoivchen al ale yerakos, and then they would pour this mix onto leaves of vegetables. Sounds like they were pouring it onto lettuce or something. V'nefim betanur, and then they would bake it in an oven im he'olim, together with these leaves. V'huadin kishenefim amachvas b'li shemen, or the same halacha would apply if you poured it on a griddle without any oil. So this almost sounds like the recipes that I've seen for making wraps. I've looked for recipes for making soft wraps, and the recipes that I have seen call for a liquid batter, but it's primarily a batter of flour and water and salt, but it's a liquid consistency. And you take a frying pan without any oil, you heat it up, you pour it down, and you make it very, very, very thin, and you just bake it mamish for like a minute maybe in the pan, and then flip it over, and then you put it on a plate, you cover it with a towel so that the steam should keep it soft. So it's very thin, and it's very soft. So why is it possible בכיסנין? So let's see. The Mishnah Berurah continues, and he says, "V'dafku be'elu shem dakim v'rakim b'yoser." Over here, we're talking about things that are very, very thin and soft. Avalimenam rakim v'dakim kol kach mavur b'sif yodalid dedin lechem alavu mavarach hamoitzi. It's hard to pull out exactly from this Mishnah Berurah and Lamed Zayin over here why these soft lachmaniyos would be mizainos and bracha achas mein shalosh, except for the fact that it's blila raka, and blila raka is not suras hapas. It's not what the Gemara calls teresa denama. It's not suras hapas. It doesn't look like something that's bread. Bread is a dough. Bread is not a batter. and you end up with something exceptionally thin and exceptionally flimsy. And apparently this is not a bread that people would be kaveh suda on, and therefore this is pas haba bekistin. So here we had these two types of lachmaniyos. Another Paisik told me that this second type of lachmaniyos, where it's a blila raka, is like a sponge cake. I'm sorry, with all due respect to him, that does not come from this Mishnah Berurah, because the Mishnah Berurah says over here very clearly, shehim dakim verakim biyoser. They're very thin and very soft. Sponge cake is not thin. Sponge cake could be this thick. So this is clearly not talking about sponge cake. To me, like I said, this is talking about a tortilla or a wrap, a very thin, soft wrap. Says the Mechaber Weiter on the bottom line, V'im kava suda sayaleim, if you're kaveh suda on these lachmaniyos, so you make a schnitzel wrap and you kaveh suda on it, but I think it means that you're kaveh suda together with the shear. Well, take a look, meaning you have the shear of kaveh suda, not just that you made a schnitzel wrap and you had in mind that it should be your lunch, so you were kaveh suda. No, you ate enough of it to be considered kaveh suda. V'im kava suda sayaleim mevarach hamoitzi uberchas hamazon. Says the Mishnah Berurah is katlam ches v'im kava v'kasra paiskim, the paiskim write the oiset shekarim beprag vola plaktus. Vol platkis. This sounds like a waffle or maybe a pancake. Shenasid gamken blilosan raka, which is also made with a soft batter. Ach mipneishem ispashtin ba'afiyosan. But since they spread out when you bake them, nasim dakim uklushim harbe yoiser meoisan nol silkas sheniskela el. They come out even thinner and softer than the nol silkas. Ein levarich alam amoitzi afilu b'diet b'dekava, that you wouldn't make amoitzi on even with kvi yasuda. De'ed al zed teres lechem klal v'dimulu teresa b'sif tezvav. This sounds like the teresa that we're going to come to in sif tezvav, which is probably pancakes. We'll get to that when we see it. Ois kan lamed test, but if you're kaveh suda on these lachmaniyos with a blila raka, and the Mishnah Berurah says, what does that mean that you are kaveh suda? Uman nikra keva. What's called kviyasuda mevur le'el b'sevav Indian pas-kisnin v'hu hadin hacha, meaning that you have to have the shear of pas haba bekisnin. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. For Baruch Hashem should send Yeshua's refuahs panas and shidduchim to all those in need. Achenu kol beis Yisrael hanasunim batzaru b'shivya ha'imdim bein bayam u'bein bayabasha. Hamakam Yerachem Alehem V'Yitziam Yitzar L'Rvacha Me'afelu L'Ora U'Mishibud L'Geula Hashta B'Agala U'Vizman Kariv V'Naimar Amen. Be well and a Freilich Chanukah to one and all.